The reality of the National Hockey League is that coaches are hired to be fired. We are barely a week into the season, right? So it's too early to talk about firings. But here's the thing. November 28th of last year, Todd McClellan and Mike Yeo both sent packing. McClellan was the fourth coach sent packing hours after Yeo, which was after Quenneville and Stevens. So LA, Chicago, St. Louis, and Edmonton all fired their coaches. Three of them still missed the playoffs. That fourth one, I think St. Louis did pretty well. And it's easy to forget that November 28th they fired him. They brought in Craig Berube. And Berube brought in systems that, yeah, I know where they were in January. And I swear to God, I'm so sick of seeing it already. St. Louis was not a bad team. They had a lot of good players. They underperformed in the early part of the season. But go back and look at their record. It wasn't awful. Yes, they were last overall, I get it. Their record was not awful, and they never fell further than, I want to say, 7 points out of the playoffs. You don't rebuild when you're 7 points out of the playoffs, unless I think the Rangers are the only ones I've seen that were close that went, we're not going to make it. And if we did, we weren't going to be any good anyway, so we're just going to start dismantling things. So in general, if you're close, you don't make that change. So I wanted to look at teams that early on, we can look at their coach and say, is there a chance? And I went in alphabetical order so nobody can say, oh, look, he put his most likely at the top. I might be wearing San Jose because I think there's pressure on Peter DeBoer, but I might be wearing San Jose because I really enjoy having an excuse to wear this fantastic third jersey. So it's up to you guys to decide. Dallas, they have a 1-3-1 record. Jim Montgomery's the coach. He was hired May 4th of 2018. Coaches are hired to be fired. And the expectation is that Dallas is supposed to be a contender. They added Pavelski. I think they're still going to give him some leeway once Corey Perry comes back and plays some games when we see this roster all together. The problem is, of course, there's still other injuries that are out there as well, and injuries can only be an excuse for so long. At some point, you want results. And in the Dallas market, it feels important that this team get better and create some interest locally, and I don't see that with the current team as it's set up. Last night, that 2-goal lead in the third period at home, the fact that they blew it, that looks bad. And it's on top of the fact that they'd only won 1 out of 4 coming into that game. Minnesota, they're 0-3. Bruce Boudreau, who was brought in May 7th, I should say, of 2016. So he's had a couple of years. And no playoffs were expected. This is where it gets kind of strange. So this is where I'm not sure what Minnesota does. They're not expected to be a playoff team anyways. Now, Bill Guerin gave them the whole, nobody expects anything from us, go out there and prove them wrong, boys, kind of speech. But does the expectation being basically nothing get them off the hook? Does it get Boudreau off the hook? Or does Minnesota at some point, if this record gets really ugly, say, you know what? We've got to make a change behind the bench. And/or do they look at it and go, yeah, we're in a rebuild, and Bruce Boudreau isn't the guy that we want behind the bench for a rebuild? That's where things get interesting. Montreal, they start 1-1-2. Claude Julien is their coach. He was hired February 14th of 2017. And they're seen as a fringe playoff team. They may very well be a wild card, but they're seen as one of those fringe teams that might make it, and they might not. But it's Montreal. The expectations in Montreal are usually kind of unrealistic. And, Montreal fans, God bless them. They want playoffs, and they want to contend. They're looking at the Toronto Maple Leafs in the last few years, and they're going, you know what, this idea that Toronto's ahead of us, that's crap. We've got to be better than this. And I don't disagree with that reasoning on some level. The Toronto Maple Leafs organization has been viewed for decades as being, below certain teams, especially Montreal. But the expectation with Montreal is to win. And if we see this team continue on this path where they've only won 1 out of 4 games, they've only lost 1 in regulation, so I'm not trying to panic in this video. I'm just saying when I look at records, I go, you know what? Montreal demands a certain level from its players. Maybe Michel Therrien comes back. I don't know. I will say this. I would be surprised if Montreal went with an Anglophone coach if they did get rid of Claude Julien. And I think it would take quite a while before Claude Julien's job would actually be in trouble. I just felt that with this record and with Montreal fans being as demanding as they can be, he's one to keep an eye on. New Jersey, and this is where Devils fans go, damn right. 0-2-2, John Hines. He was hired June 2nd of 2015. One of the longer tenured of the coaches on the board. And the idea with the New Jersey Devils was this year they're supposed to improve. They don't make the playoffs, that's fine. Fine. They don't. But we want to see some improvement. We want to see a team that's at least looking like they might get into the playoffs in some way, shape, or form. If not this year, then next. They added PK Subban. They added Nikita Gusev. They got Jack Hughes as the number 1 draft pick. Hughes has played well, and I've already seen bust and overrated and all this. No. Jack Hughes has played well. Some rookies take to the league and put up all kinds of points like Barzal did, and some don't. You look at the rookie season of Joe Thornton as a good example. Joe Thornton did not come into the NHL and light it on fire. Neither did Tyler Seguin, also a Bruins draft pick. So I don't put any of this on Hughes. I think he's playing well. I think you got to keep playing him. But there are some complaints about the way Hines is deploying certain players and who's getting ice time and who's not. And yeah, so Hines is definitely a guy that I'm looking at as being in trouble. Because the expectation was that this team was going to get better this year. So moving along though from the New Jersey Devils to San Jose. They're 1-4 after their win last night. Peter DeBoer is the coach. May 28th, 2015 he was hired, so a few days before John Hines takes over in New Jersey. San Jose was seen as being a contender this year. Now, I've had my concerns, and when I did the season preview for San Jose, whenever I've talked about San Jose during the summer, I've had concerns about their forward group, that I didn't think their forward group was good enough, and that letting go of some of the players that they have been over the last couple of years, eventually shedding that amount of depth is going to hurt them. And I did think that they signed Karlsson for a lot of money and a lot of term. I really, for the first time since Doug Wilson took over as GM, I'm not sure what his vision is, where I'm looking at roster decisions being made, like losing Joe Pavelski and keeping Karlsson, and just that amount of money being invested in your top 2 defensemen. And I think, because here's the thing. Everybody gets mad at Kyle Dubas in Toronto, and everybody laughs at Kyle Dubas if you're outside Toronto, like, oh, what a moron with his cap space. Look at what he's spending all his money on. San Jose, between Burns and Karlsson, you look at that amount of money. It's a lot. And it gets more and more difficult to put 12 forwards on the ice. So the fact that he went from a couple months ago saying, well, we don't have any space for Patrick Marleau, to saying, all right, we're going to sign Patrick Marleau. That tells me that Wilson may be on the hot seat as well. Doug Wilson may find himself in the hot seat, although that is unlikely. I think it would take multiple playoff misses for him to be on the hot seat, but Peter DeBoer would be. The easiest thing to do is fire the coach. It's the easiest thing to do. You don't have to worry about trading out players. Just get rid of the coach and see if things change. And if you look at last season, LA, it didn't get better. Chicago, Jeremy Colleton definitely brought in some things that needed. He made some changes that need to be changed in Chicago. We'll see this year if they get back into the playoffs. Of course, Craig Berube, fantastic run in St. Louis and Stanley Cup and all that. And then when McClellan was fired and they brought in Ken Hitchcock, in some ways things improved short term, but in the long term it just didn't help anything. There were other problems with Edmonton. So firing a coach doesn't necessarily fix everything. Tampa, they're 2-1-1. They had a fantastic game last night, 7-3. John Cooper, the longest tenured coach in the National Hockey League, hired March 25th of 2013. So he's been around for 6 years in Tampa. Good news. They had 62 wins last year. Also good news. Then they got swept in the playoffs. And the maddening thing to me is that he is so cool and calm and collected behind the bench. You kind of feel like you have to check him for a pulse. And you don't want a coach who's yelling and screaming and throwing things on the ice and yelling at the refs all the time. But if the Tampa Bay Lightning struggle, that may be the kind of coach that Tampa brings in. We've already heard Stamkos talking about how, early in the season, and it's early, that there's a feeling that, well, we're talented, our talent will take over. And it kind of did last night against Toronto. The expectations of Stanley Cup. So if this team seems kind of middling and sort of dragging their feet a little bit, John Cooper, who might be one of the best coaches in the NHL, who would be unemployed for about the same period of time as Quenneville. Quenneville was unemployed until he decided, all right, I'm ready to go back, and Florida went, right here. I don't think Cooper would be unemployed for very long at all. I think there are plenty of teams in the NHL that would hire him as a replacement. Not because they don't like the coach they have, but because they like Cooper. That being said, The pressure in Tampa is fantastically high. Not as high as Toronto. A 2-2-1 start for Mike Babcock. There have been Leaf fans who have wanted Mike Babcock gone for a while. And he was hired May 20th of 2015. The expectation is a Stanley Cup. I don't think it's necessarily 100% fair either. This is a team that hasn't had home ice advantage in a round yet. And that's something that gets lost in all this talk about, Toronto on TSN and Sportsnet. Toronto hasn't had home ice in a single series. Now, I understand that their division's really tough, and they were on the road in part because over the last couple of years, they and Boston have been the arguably second and third best teams in the conference. That you could make an argument they were maybe better than the team that won the Metro Division. But you deal the hand that you're dealt, and or you play the hand that you're dealt. Of course, it gets dealt. Anyway, you play the hand that you're dealt. Mike Babcock's in a tough position. If Toronto is middling, if they're a 500 team, I'll say into mid-November, his job is going to be on the line. Toronto has a problem on the blue line starting next summer in that they don't have. I think Riley's the only one signed past this summer, other than Sandin, Liljegren, and anybody who's on an entry level contract. Toronto has a problem, and here's the thing: Toronto, I would argue that their blue line depth still is lacking on some level. Now, Dermott coming back will help. And maybe when Dermott and Hyman come back, Toronto turns it on and everything goes to, gangbusters again. But the pressure in Toronto is really intense. So if this team continues to kind of go one up, one down, they look great one night, they look middling the next, or especially like last night where they looked great in the first period, and then the second and the third, well, we're done. And especially if Freddie Anderson's numbers turn pedestrian, it could very well be Babcock that ends up out of there, which wouldn't be fair, would it? If you're the coach behind the bench and your goaltender kind of turns to mush in front of your eyes, a goaltender's been solid before that season. It's kind of unfair that would affect your job, but that's the way coaching works. That's the way the NHL works. It was part of what happened in St. Louis with Mike Yeo as well, is that Jake Allen just wasn't playing well enough. Eventually, Bennington went in, but it was Berube that was the coach when that happened. And the last coach I want to talk about is Todd Reirden in Washington. There's certainly been Capitals fans that have not been as impressed with him since he took over as the man that he took over from, Barry Trotz, which is understandable because Barry Trotz arguably is the best coach in the league. The Capitals 2-1-2, and it's not just that they've lost 3 out of 5, it's how. It's that they have leads in these games, and they look like they should win, and then they don't. And there's no excuse for Wise, even though it's early in the season. Reirden, of course, was hired June 29th of 2018 after that contentious divorce they had with Barry Trotz, who then went to the Islanders. The expectation with the Capitals, to me, is that they're at least a contender. I don't see cup or die like I see with Toronto and Tampa. Like, we want the cup or somebody's head's going to roll. But the Capitals are expected to be a contender. They're expected to be one of the top 2 teams in the Metro. And if they're not, if they struggle, if they continue to blow leads like this as well, Todd Reirden will find himself on the hot seat. Because, again, there are fans that aren't necessarily all that happy with the way things have been run since Barry Trotz left. There are still fans who likely would love to see Barry Trotz back behind the bench. I would think 90% at least of Capitals fans would be like, yeah, cool, Barry Trotz is back. But the Capitals are looking at Ovechkin's in his mid-30s. You've got Holtby and Backstrom on expiring contracts. There is pressure on them to win right now. Yes, Samsonov's coming up, looks pretty darn good. But who would replace Backstrom on this team? Backstrom's fantastic. If Backstrom left, who would replace him? And then if, let's say, Kuzi comes up to replace him, Kuznetsov's number one. Well, there's some depth that you're losing there. And I'm not going to shortchange Backstrom on this either. I think it'd be really difficult for anybody to replace him. And the other concern, too, like last night, Ovechkin looked great. Looked fantastic. But at some point, he is going to slow down. I'm pretty sure he's human. I'm not 100% on that, but I'm pretty sure he's human. And as a human being, eventually, we do see that slowdown. So for the Capitals, the pressure's there to be a contender, and we'll see what happens. But these are the 8 most likely to me. Remember, we lost 4 by the end of November last year. So the idea that we may see a bunch of coaches get fired, it's possible. But for comparison, the previous year, 2017, 2018, we saw 0. No coaches get fired the entire season. So it's quite possible this video ages really poorly. Nobody gets fired. Everybody's all kumbaya, holding hands, and singing like at the end of the Grinch that Stole Christmas. They're all these guys are who's in Whoville. But if I had to wager, I would say at least a couple of coaches are out by the end of November. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Which one of these coaches is under the most amount of pressure right now? I'll go with Babcock because of where he plays, because he's in that absolute pressure cooker of Toronto right now, and with the amount of money that they've spent in the summer, the expectation now is, all right, so now we're a contender, right? This losing to Boston in the first round, that crap's done, right? So, yeah, with that raised expectation, it makes it tougher for a coach to stick around when the record doesn't match that expectation. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. As always, don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I'll talk to you again soon.